This video shows the process that I used to refinish about 12 doors in our house, removing the paint and restoring the original stained finish. Here is an example of one of the doors I refinished in the bathroom. So, first I removed all the hardware, the doorknobs, hinges, and any towel racks or hooks. I then removed the paint, stripped the paint, and polished the hinges, refinished those as well. I used a particular type of stripper called Smart Strip that is environmentally friendly, has no odor, so you can work with it indoors, and have to cover it with this paper to allow it to keep longer without drying out. After I let it sit for about a day and a half, I then removed all of the paint that was loose at that point, but there's about 90% of the paint, so I did another coat, and one day later removed that, and that got about 99% of the paint off. I used soap and water and scouring pads to remove as much of that paint as possible. And after letting the door dry and repeating the process on the other side, then I started cleaning it and sanding it. So that involved scrubbing it down with a brush and to remove the loose debris, then sanding it with a power sander with an 80 grit sand belt. After that, I hand sanded it with 80 grit to remove any marks left behind by the power sander. I then repeated the process with a 120 grade, fine grade sand belt, and then hand sanded that as well, and repeated the process on both sides of the door. After I had it sanded, I then scrubbed it with trisodium phosphate to remove any residuals and to basically get the wood prepped for staining. This was probably one of the more tedious parts and time-consuming parts, to scrub every bit of paint out that was left behind from the other processes, and making sure the door was completely clean. After I let it dry overnight, then I was ready to stain it, and I used red mahogany wood stain. You don't let it dry, you just leave it on for the longer you leave it on, the darker the stain will be. I didn't want it real dark, so I just left it on a few minutes and then wiped it down to make sure that you could see the red mahogany and wood grain through the stain. After I finished staining it on both sides, then I applied the top coat finish, which is basically a clear acrylic finish, and this would be the final step of finishing the door. I would do at least 2 coats of this to make sure that it had a nice solid sheen to it, and let that dry overnight. At this point, I'm basically into the 8th day of the process, and so it's a fairly time-consuming process that requires, several overnight drying steps. Once I finished top coating the door, then I had to reinstall the new hardware, basically a new doorknob, and I reinstalled the refurbished hinges, and that's the 9th day of the process. So final look is, here's the original doors that I started with, and here's what they look like after finishing the restaining process. I also repaired a broken panel in the door by removing the panel, re-edging it, gluing replacement strips to each side, trimming them up, stripping the old stain and restaining it and replacing it in the door.